In the internet, there is an increasing amount of information suggesting that fruits and fructose are almost deadly harmful. And more of my viewers are turning to me with the question, is it worth eating fruits at all? Maybe replace them with something else. This hysteria is fueled by keto dieters, supported by fruit panickers, and everyone supposedly relies on scientific research. I have collected 41 scientific studies, and with the help of these 24 scientific studies, we will dispel those 10 misconceptions about fruits that were created. And, most importantly, we will determine together the minimum amount of fruit that needs to be eaten and the maximum amount that can be eaten to get the maximum benefit for your health. You will also learn about which fruits are categorically contraindicated for all people. If you want to become a master of your health, hit like, and we will start. And, as always, we will rely on the results of scientific research. Today, there are 41 of them. You will be able to download the list of all scientific studies via a special link at the very end of the description for this video. The main sin of fruits is usually declared to be fructose. And today, I will tell you about how fructose from fruits and added fructose affect your health differently. You will learn whether fruits really cause liver obesity and lead to obesity of the entire body, to weight gain. I will talk about whether consuming large amounts of fruits leads to diabetes and whether diabetics can eat fruits. Find out whether fruits raise cholesterol, whether fruits increase the risk of cancer, whether they increase the amount of uric acid and the risk of gout. And most importantly, you will learn about how long-term fruit eating affects health, how many fruits can be eaten at a minimum and maximum in order to get the maximum health benefits. Moving on to fruits. There is an opinion that they are of little benefit due to their low content of proteins, fats, omega-3 seconds, zinc, and iron, and that their consumption can harm health. These views are widespread among supporters of keto diets and fruit critics. It is important to critically approach information from the internet, checking sources and the accuracy of data, especially when it comes to health. My video focuses on fruits and fruit smoothies, as opposed to fruit juices without fiber, which affect the body differently. There is a misconception that fructose is present only in fruits and sweet products, ignoring its presence in vegetables and berries. In fact, fruits contain many types of sugars, but particular attention is paid to fructose. I analyzed data from 4 large studies showing the content of fructose and other sugars in various products. For convenience, I have also prepared infographics with data on the content of fructose in common products. So, here's what to note. Fructose is present not only in fruits but also in vegetables, sometimes in greater amounts than in some fruits. We compared fructose in vegetables and fruits and found that, for example, green cabbage and sweet peppers contain more fructose than oranges or melons. This demonstrates that the fears around fructose, spread by keto dieters and fructophobes, are somewhat exaggerated. Even a regular salad made of cabbage, peppers, and tomatoes contains as much fructose as tangerines and apricots. This data undermines the arguments about the harm of fructose, especially when considering that vegetables, considered safe, actually contain quite a lot of it. Fructophobes and keto preachers mistakenly claim that fruits are the main source of harmful fructose, ignoring its content in vegetables and even whole grain bread. Interestingly, berries, which they recommend as low fructose, actually contain much more of it than many fruits. These conclusions refute the myths about fructose spread by keto dieters and emphasize the need for a deeper understanding of sugar content in various products for healthy eating. I draw attention to the fact that fructose is present in both fruits and vegetables, and in some vegetables, its content may exceed levels found in some fruits and citrus. This does not make berries less beneficial, despite their high fructose content. It is important to understand that not all fructose is equally harmful to health. Only an excess of added fructose, found in sweet drinks and processed products, is harmful, not fructose naturally found in fruits. Research shows that fructose from fruits and added fructose have different effects on health. For example, one study showed that consuming fructose from fruits increases the number of beneficial bacteria in the intestine, while added fructose leads to the opposite effect. This highlights that fruits improve health, unlike products with added fructose. The fifth myth, actively spread by critics of fructose, claims that fructose, unlike glucose, is not digested in the intestine and is not directly absorbed by cells, but is transported to the liver, causing its conversion into fat. Indeed, an excess of added fructose can negatively affect the liver, but this does not apply to fructose from fruits. In one study, healthy participants had their diet's caloric content increased through fruits or nuts. Fruit consumers saw their fructose intake rise from 9 to 26 grams, while nut consumers saw a decrease from 12 to 6 grams. After 2 months, neither group showed an increase in liver fats. Long-term fruit consumption, proven by a study involving 52,000 people over 4.2 years, showed a reduction in the risk of fatty liver by 23% in women and 25% in men. The minimum fruit consumption was between 230 to 300 grams per day, and the maximum was between 1,900 to 2,000 grams. Thus, consuming up to 2 kilograms of fruits per day for 4 years reduced the risk of fatty liver disease. And that's not all, friends. The fact is that even added fructose, even in large amounts, leads to fatty liver regeneration only in cases where it is added beyond the usual calorie consumption. That is, if you consume calories beyond the norm and gain weight, fructose acts negatively on the liver. However, if you consume the same amount of calories as you expend, or less, then fructose reduces the risk of any liver degeneration. In the study, healthy people had their caloric intake increased through fruits or nuts. Fruit consumers saw their fructose intake rise from 9 to 26 grams, while nut consumers saw a decrease from 12 to 6 grams. After 2 months, neither group showed an increase in liver fats. This is confirmed by a study summarizing the results of 5 scientific papers, which showed that the level of liver enzymes ALT, indicating liver damage, increased only with the consumption of fructose beyond the necessary amount of calories. A meta-analysis of 15 studies showed that consuming less than 100-200 grams of fruits per day increases the risk of liver cancer, while consuming more than 200-500 grams of fruits reduces this risk. This indicates that a larger amount of fruits can further reduce the risk of liver cancer. Well, we are forced to conclude again, consuming large amounts of fruits, especially without exceeding the usual calorie intake, significantly reduces the risk of fatty liver disease and other liver diseases. Research shows that it reduces the amount of liver enzymes and the risk of liver cancer. One study, where participants increased calories through fruits or nuts, showed that even with an increase in fructose consumption to 26 grams, there was no increase in liver fats. Regarding cholesterol, studies debunked the myth that fructose raises cholesterol levels. In an experiment with 2 groups, where one consumed a diet with 90% fructose and the other with 90% glucose, both groups showed a reduction in total and bad cholesterol levels, with the fructose group reducing bad cholesterol even more. In another 2-month study, where participants added calories through fruits and nuts, it was found that in both groups, the level of bad and total cholesterol decreased, with the nut group decreasing slightly more. Fruit consumption ranged from 600 to 1,300 grams per day, and this did not lead to fatty liver disease or deterioration of blood lipid indicators, thanks to the active lifestyle of the participants. Thus, even large consumption of fructose from fruits does not harm health, refuting common myths. Many promote the idea of the keto diet without mentioning how it can affect cholesterol levels. For instance, a study with children on a keto diet showed that within 6 months, the levels of total and bad cholesterol significantly increased, while good cholesterol decreased. These changes persisted for 12 months after the end of the diet and disappeared only after 24 months. Adults following the keto diet for more than 11 years also experienced an increase in bad cholesterol levels. Moreover, the number of cardiovascular disease cases in the keto diet group was 2.2 times higher than in people on a regular diet. On the other hand, a study in which participants increased their calorie intake through fruits and nuts showed that the group consuming fruits and nuts experienced a decrease in bad and total cholesterol levels, with the nuts group seeing a slightly greater reduction. Consuming fruits in amounts ranging from 600 to 1,300 grams per day did not lead to fatty liver disease and did not worsen blood lipid indicators. Thus, large amounts of fruits, from 600 to 2,300 grams per day, contribute to reducing the level of bad cholesterol. whereas the keto diet increases the level of bad cholesterol and the risks of cardiovascular diseases. Unlike the keto diet, fruits not only do not increase the risks of heart diseases, but can also be beneficial in reducing these risks. The fact is that the keto diet is not a panacea for diabetes, and fruits do not increase the risk of its development. On the contrary, studies show that fruits reduce the risk of diabetes. For example, one study indicates that most fruits, except for melons, reduce the risk of diabetes, with blueberries being the most effective. Another study, combining the results of several studies, showed that fructose from fruits reduces insulin resistance in both people with and without diabetes, improving the body's ability to respond to insulin. At the same time, added fructose from soft drinks slightly reduces insulin resistance but increases the risk of fatty liver disease transformation. Thus, fruits are a beneficial product that contributes to the reduction of diabetes risk, unlike added fructose, which affects the body differently. This confirms that fruits do not deserve the reputation of being enemy number one for diabetics, as some critics claim. Moving on to the conclusion, based on numerous studies, including one that shows fructose does not harm glycemic control if consumed within the normal diet without exceeding the total calorie intake. A meta-analysis of 155 studies confirmed that consuming fructose from fruits reduces diabetes risks. Contrary to some claims, the keto diet may increase the risk of diabetes by 30%, as shown by 3 large studies involving from 4,500 to 40,500 people, conducted over 3.6 to 20 years. Scientific evidence indicates that fruits reduce the risk of diabetes, not increase it. For example, blueberries, which contain a lot of fructose, most effectively reduce this risk. Studies from the 70s and 80s already showed that changing the diet can help get rid of diabetes, including insulin dependent, and prevent its development. This information is little known due to the influence of the pharmaceutical industry and the promotion of the keto diet, despite their potential harm to diabetics. In 1976, Dr. Nathan Pritikin opened a center where he used a special diet and physical exercises to treat patients with diabetes, both insulin-dependent and not. The program, rich in fresh fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, showed remarkable results. The blood glucose level significantly decreased in all patients. About half of the patients with type 2 diabetes recovered. Nearly half of the insulin-dependent patients were able to stop using insulin, and 3/4 stopped taking glucose control medications. Another study involving nearly 7,000 people with early-stage diabetes and 181 individuals with impaired glucose tolerance confirmed the effectiveness of this approach. In the group that followed a diet high in vegetables and fruits with reduced fat content, after 5 years, half had lost glucose tolerance, and more than half of the diabetic patients recovered and remained healthy during the subsequent 6 years of observation. A major problem for people with diabetes is the significantly increased risk of death from cardiovascular diseases, cancer, and other diseases. Observation of program participants who followed a diet rich in fruits and vegetables continued for 12 years after its completion. The mortality rate in this group, regardless of whether they were cured of diabetes or not, was comparable to the mortality rate of people without diabetes. Meanwhile, in the group that followed the standard anti-diabetic diet with low carbohydrates and high fats, the mortality rate was significantly higher than that of people without diabetes and even twice as high as that of people who ate a diet rich in fruits and vegetables. Thus, a diet rich in fruits and vegetables reduces the risk of increased mortality even in people with diabetes, which is extremely important. Of course, not everyone can consume a large amount of fruits. This depends on the individual characteristics of each person, with or without diabetes. Some may need to reduce the number of fruits to maintain health. Details on how to tailor an anti-diabetic diet based on research, including Dr. Nathan Pritikin's program, can be found in the available studies online. We will consider 2 common myths supported by some experts, including the assumption that fruits reduce the level of the satiety hormone ghrelin, leading to overeating, and that fructose, processed in the liver, directly turns into fat, increasing weight. However, research shows a different picture. For example, after consuming 700 grams of fruit, The level of ghrelin does indeed slightly decrease and returns to the initial level after half an hour, but then increases after 2.5 hours and is significantly higher than the initial level after 4 hours. It is important to note that ghrelin is not the only hormone responsible for the feeling of satiety. During the same time, the level of hunger decreases and the feeling of satiety after consuming fruits increases, which refutes the assumption that fruits contribute to overeating due to a decrease in ghrelin levels. Thus, claims about the negative impact of fruits on weight and hunger are not supported by scientific research. Fruits and other sweets increase the level of endorphins, the pleasure hormones, in the brain. After consuming fruits, the level of endorphins quickly drops, which may encourage increased consumption. However, to avoid overeating fruits, it is recommended to set a certain portion in front of you and store the rest in the refrigerator. After consumption, it is advisable to wait another half hour, allowing the level of satiety to increase and the level of hunger to fall. The level of ghrelin also adapts, and self-control increases the level of endorphins. The study showed that after consuming 700 grams of fruits, the level of ghrelin decreases and returns to the initial level after half an hour, and then rises above the initial level after 2.5 and 4 hours. This refutes the myth that fruits reduce satiety and contribute to overeating. It is important to note that ghrelin is not the only hormone that affects the feeling of hunger and satiety. Another study showed that with an increase in the caloric content of the diet due to fruits and nuts, participants gained weight, but the level of accumulated fat did not exceed the level of those who consumed nuts, even with a 4-fold increase in fructose consumption in the group consuming fruits. Thus, fruits, even with an excess of calories, do not contribute to weight gain more than other products. In conclusion of this point, consuming fruits within one's own caloric needs does not harm health and does not lead to weight gain. The optimal amount of fruit varies for each individual and should match their needs and goals. Furthermore, I will discuss a study where participants followed a fruitarian diet based on fruits for 4 months and how it affected their weight. We will also learn how much fruit can be consumed and which fruits may be dangerous. Lastly, I will dispel the 10th myth that fructose, including that contained in fruits, increases the level of uric acid in the blood, raising the risk of gout. A study that combined the results of 3 major studies showed that consuming fruits, unlike added fructose, lowers the level of uric acid in the blood and the risk of gout, whereas carbonated drinks containing added fructose increase it, as do fruit juices. This emphasizes that our conclusions pertain only to fruits, not juices, and that not all fructose affects equally. Let's move on to a unique study from 1971. Where 18 participants aged 26 to 64 consumed enormous doses of fruits over 4 months. Their diet was compared with the 12-year experience of a fruitarian, a physical education teacher who was actively engaged in sports, which reduced the potential harm of the diet. The balance of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates for participants was 7.5% protein, 37.5% fats, and 54.5% carbohydrates, predominantly from fruits. Despite an initial decrease in blood protein levels, it recovered by the 12th week of the experiment. All participants experienced increased energy and endurance. Those with high blood pressure saw it normalize, and constipation problems disappeared. Their diet included not only fruits but also between 25 to 45 grams of nuts daily, as well as avocados, providing a sufficient amount of fats and protein. Daily fruit consumption exceeded 2 kilograms. Contrary to assumptions about the harm of such a regime, the study showed positive changes in participants' health without significant weight gain. Remember, I promised to tell you about the impact of high fruit consumption on weight. Friends, despite the fact that experiment participants consumed a significant amount of sugars from fruits, their health improved, particularly the ability to control blood sugar levels. Fasting glucose levels after 12 weeks decreased compared to the beginning of the study. Glucose levels after eating at 30, 60, 90, and 120 minutes were significantly lower both at 6 and 12 weeks compared to the start when they were eating normally. This indicates that the body adapted and successfully digested large amounts of fruits without causing sugar to spike sharply. The body's ability to control blood sugar improved, and insulin resistance decreased, indicating a reduced risk of diabetes. However, the fruitarian with 12 years of experience had a significantly worse ability to control blood sugar levels after eating than the experiment participants. This, plus the deterioration of blood sugar control among participants, prompted the termination of the experiment after 4 months. This leads us to conclude that long-term adherence to a fruitarian diet with high fruit consumption, 2 kilograms per day, especially with high energy intake from fats, can over time impair the body's ability to resist a high amount of sugar and potentially lead to the development of diabetes. However, the fruitarian with 12 years of experience, thanks to an active lifestyle and no weight gain, did not encounter these problems, as scientists explain. And briefly, before we discuss how much fruit can be eaten and which fruits are better to avoid, let's summarize this study of fruitarians. The main question: did the colossal consumption of fruits, 2 kilograms per day, increase their weight? The answer is no. Despite consuming between 2,100 to 2,400 calories and a large amount of fructose, which is claimed to be processed into fat in the liver and deposited in cells under the influence of insulin, the participants' weight slightly decreased after 6 to 12 weeks. After 4 months, it even remained below the initial weight. This confirms our conclusion: you will not gain more weight from fruits than from other products if you consume them within your regular caloric intake. Thus, we dispel 10 misconceptions about fruits, relying on numerous studies that showed that fructose does not harm health if you do not exceed the usual caloric content of your diet. And now we can move on to answering the question of how much fruit can be eaten. But before that, let's ask, who? Because different people can eat different amounts, and it depends on their ability to metabolize fructose, that is, to digest it in different ways. Contrary to what many food bloggers say, despite their millions of views, not all fructose enters the blood and not all of it goes into the liver. Fructose is digested entirely differently, depending on the dose of fructose you have eaten. Small doses of fructose, i.e., less than 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, are converted into glucose and organic acids, and it is glucose, not fructose, that enters the blood. If you consume more than 1 gram of fructose per kilogram of body weight, a significant part of the fructose enters the blood and is processed by the liver. Some people, fructose malabsorbers, who, according to various estimates, make up 40 to 70%, experience a host of unpleasant symptoms from eating fruits or large amounts of fructose. Such people may experience diarrhea, excessive gas, intestinal pain, and burping air. There are fructose tests that determine its presence by the amount of hydrogen in the exhaled air. Fructose tolerance is your personal characteristic. You need to find the amount of fruit you can eat safely. If you have fructose malabsorption, it does not mean that you need to give up fruits. At the end of the video, you will learn why you should not give up fruits, based on long-term research on the consumption of significant amounts of fruits and its impact on various diseases. If you suspect you have fructose malabsorption, you need to find, as I have already said, the right dose of fruit and eat them in the right form. Scientists note that 10-15 grams of fructose in the form of fruits generally do not cause any unpleasant symptoms in fructose malabsorbers. Already 25 grams of fructose can cause violent gas release in about 11 to 50% of people. What is 25 grams of fructose? This is approximately half a kilogram of high fructose cherries or watermelon, which is a significant amount. If fruits cause you unpleasant sensations, scientists recommend completely abstaining from fruits and high fructose vegetables. I provided you with infographics on how much fructose is contained in fruits and vegetables at the beginning of the video. For 2 and maybe up to 6 weeks, usually, this is the time required for the intestine to regulate. Then you can start introducing small amounts of fruits. Choose, of course, low fructose ones and thus determine your personal consumption level that will allow you to digest these fruits without problems. Base this on your personal sensations and on stool density, the presence of gas, stomach spasms, burping, and determine the amount of fruit that is beneficial for you. Eat these fruits, not all at once, but spread them out over the day in 3-4 servings. Fruits can be eaten with protein foods because protein foods increase the absorbability of fructose, which is especially important for fructose malabsorbers, allowing them to increase the amount of fructose they can consume without pain. I talk about what fruits can be mixed with and what they should not be mixed with in a separate video. In addition to malabsorbers, there is another significantly larger group of people for whom the consumption of certain fruits is prohibited. These are people with irritable bowel syndrome, which has a wide range of different symptoms. Unpleasant symptoms in these people can be caused not only by fructose but also by other ingredients contained in fruits, grains, and vegetables. For these people, a special FODMAP diet has been compiled, which determines which products can be eaten and which should be avoided. They may not have to abstain from all fruits. So how much can they eat, and which fruits are best avoided? To understand how much fruit can be eaten, we will now quickly run through studies in which people consumed a significant amount of fruit over a long period, and see how this affected the risk of various deadly diseases. Here is a study of 108,000 people over 28 years. These people regularly filled out food diaries, and scientists used them to determine how different products affect health status and the risks of various diseases and death from them. A significant portion of the experiment participants died during this time, allowing scientists to make accurate conclusions. The conclusions of this study show that fruit consumption reduces the risk of death from all possible causes if you eat just 250 grams of fruit per day. Consuming 500 grams slightly increases death risks, but they are still lower than if you did not eat fruit at all. For vegetables, this limit is 300 grams, and after consuming 300 grams of vegetables, the risks of death from all causes do not increase. If you eat fruits and vegetables together, then 300 grams of each reduces the risks of death to an acceptable level. Note that fruit consumption reduces the risks of death more than vegetable consumption, and consuming both fruits and vegetables together further reduces these risks. Consuming up to 800 grams of fruits and vegetables together significantly reduces death risks. We are talking about reducing the risk of death from all causes, because consuming fruits or vegetables, for example, can either increase or decrease risks more significantly. We will now deal with the risks of death from various diseases separately to understand how much fruit can and should be eaten. Friends, let's look at a meta-analysis, that is, a study that combined the results of other studies. It included 44 studies, each of which involved from 200,000 to 2 million people over the course of decades. The risk of death from stroke, if you ate fruits, decreased in any case up to the mark of 800 grams. There simply was no more data. But, judging by the fact that the mortality curve from stroke was constantly decreasing, we can reasonably conclude that increasing the amount of fruit would also reduce the risk of death from stroke. Vegetables reduce the risk of stroke more than fruits, and fruits and vegetables together more than just fruits. However, the risk of death from other cardiovascular diseases, besides stroke, decreased equally with the consumption of 600 grams of vegetables and 800 grams of fruits. Increasing the amount of fruit would obviously lead to a greater reduction in the risk of cardiovascular diseases. Thus, consuming fruits, even in substantial amounts, up to 800 grams per day, only reduced the risk of cardiovascular diseases. I remind you of the study in which people followed a keto diet variant for almost 12 years, and the risk of death from cardiovascular diseases in them increased more than twice compared to people who ate a regular diet. This once again confirms that consuming fruits only improves our health. The risk of death from cancer decreased up to the amount of fruit at 700 grams, and by the nature of the curve, since it goes down, we can conclude that a greater amount of fruit will also reduce mortality from cancer. As for cancer and its influence by the keto diet, I have made a separate video about it. I remind you that the keto diet is not at all a panacea for people who already have cancer, and that it reduces the risks of cancer only for some types of cancer and not at all for everyone. Fruits especially significantly reduce the risk of death from respiratory diseases. However, on the risk of death from neurodegenerative diseases, such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, or senile dementia, the consumption of fruits in any amount had virtually no effect. Also, I promise to tell how the consumption of fruits affects blood pressure. A meta-analysis of several studies showed that fruit consumption significantly reduces blood pressure, and, unfortunately, this meta-analysis stopped at the mark of 700 grams per day. However, judging by the nature of the curves, further increasing the amount of fruit will only reduce the risk of increasing blood pressure. So we determined that 600 and 800 grams per day only reduce the risks of most of humanity's major killers. 700 grams per day is, in general, not a small amount. Is it worth consuming more fruits? As I've already said, the risk curves of various diseases only decrease with the increase in the amount of fruits. Therefore, when choosing the amount of fruit, rely on your internal sensations, on whether you are gaining weight or not. I remind you that you need to reduce the amount of calories from other sources. First of all, I recommend reducing the amount of calories from fats, which are high in calories and really harm the body. Also, rely on the studies I talked about regarding the absence of risk of increasing the amount of fat in the liver by 23% in women and by 25% in men when consuming large amounts of fruits. There they ate up to 2 kilograms of fruits per day. This only reduced the risks of fatty liver transformation. The lowest mark, as we see from this study, is that scientists believe that excess deaths, that is, those that could be avoided by changes in diet, begin to increase if you reduce the amount of fruits below 500 grams per day and vegetables below 700 grams per day. Around the world, it would be possible to avoid from 5.5 to almost 8 million deaths per year if people ate these amounts of fruits, 500 grams, and vegetables, 700 grams at least. However, let me remind you, not all fruits are equally beneficial. So, to the question, should we eat fruits? We answer, yes. To the question, how much to eat? We answer, a lot, depending on the state of your intestines and your fat layer. Eat both fruits and vegetables. Let there be approximately half of each, or slightly more vegetables than fruits. Which fruits should be avoided? In the process of searching for studies for this video, I stumbled upon 2 studies that, frankly, shocked me. In my childhood, when there were no fresh fruits in winter except for apples that we stored in the cellar, and which quickly became mushy and tasteless, oranges and tangerines could be bought only a few times during the winter. My mom specially preserved a tremendous amount of different fruits. It turned out that the consumption of canned fruits significantly increases the risk of death from all causes. Specifically, every 100 grams of canned fruits per day increases the risk of death by as much as 14%. This is really a lot. The results of a meta-analysis of 4 huge studies, involving several million people in total, showed that increasing the amount of canned fruits consumed from 1 to 2, 3 or more times a week only increases the risk of death from cardiovascular diseases and overall mortality. However, 2 or more servings of canned fruits per week still reduce the risk of cancer. Thankfully, this is the last conclusion of our investigation. You should not eat canned fruits. Better to buy them frozen and eat them after thawing. Even better, eat fresh, seasonal fruits. Now you can always buy them, whether it's in the season when our fruits grow or off-season when other fruits are brought to us. Eat plenty of them, and you will be healthy. More information on this topic can be found on our channel. Subscribe and hit the bell for all notifications. Please like and share this video with your friends. Thanks to our sponsors for their support. I eagerly await your comments and encourage you to watch these useful videos.